It's early morning. The room is quiet. The light coming through the curtains is the same light it always is. Somewhere in the kitchen, there's coffee you could make. Your phone is on the nightstand, full of messages you haven't read. The day is waiting, the same way it always waits. But this morning, something is different. You don't want any of it. Not the coffee, not the messages, not the day, not even the idea of wanting something else. There's no craving, no hunger, no pull toward anything in particular. The world is completely available to you, and completely indifferent to you at the same time. You're awake, you're alive, and you feel, for the first time in your life, absolutely nothing. Here's something I've never been able to fully explain, and I suspect you haven't either. You've never chosen what you want. You've never decided to be hungry, or ambitious, or in love with someone. It just happened. And you've always assumed that's fine, because you assumed the wanting was somehow still yours. But what if it isn't? What if the thing you call you is nothing but the sum of everything you want, and none of it was ever really chosen? By the end of this video, the question won't be, what would you do without desire? It will be something harder. Who would you be? In 2021, a class of drugs called GLP-1 receptor agonists became something no one had expected them to be, a window into the architecture of human identity. These drugs, you might know them as Ozempic or Mounjaro, were developed for type 2 diabetes. They worked by mimicking a hormone that signals to your brain, you're full. Stop eating. But the people taking them reported something the researchers hadn't counted on. It wasn't just hunger that disappeared. It was wanting. Patients described waking up and not thinking about food. Not in the way you feel full after a big meal. In the way a colorblind person doesn't see red. The category simply wasn't there. But then they started noticing something else. The silence extended further than food. One patient, a woman in her 40s, described it this way. She used to plan her entire day around small things she was looking forward to. Lunch, a glass of wine at night, watching something she liked. These weren't big pleasures. They were minor ones. But they were the hinges the day turned on. They gave Tuesday a different texture than Monday. They gave the afternoon something to lean toward. And then, one morning, she realized she hadn't thought about any of it. Not because she was sad, just because she didn't need to. She described the sensation as existing in a single long present tense with no future tense attached to it. Another described shopping. He'd always enjoyed buying things, not compulsively. Just it was something he liked. The slight anticipation before clicking a purchase, the small lift of receiving a package. He stopped one day in front of a store window, looked at the display, and felt nothing. Not disgust, not indifference in a conscious sense, more like looking at a section of wall. He walked away, didn't think about it again. A third, a man in his late 30s, noticed it first with music. He'd always used music to move through his day. A playlist for the commute, something specific for working, something else for running. And then one week, he realized he hadn't turned anything on. Not because he was busy, because the desire to hear anything in particular had simply stopped generating. These people were, by clinical measures, fine. No depression, no loss of pleasure in things they were already doing. They functioned, they laughed, they loved their families. But they had lost something that most of us have never thought to ask a question about. The texture of wanting. The low hum of appetite that runs beneath every hour of every day. and some of them found it deeply unsettling. Not because they were miserable, but because they felt, for the first time, that they had no idea who they were without it. Which raises a question that's harder than it looks. If losing desire makes you feel like you've lost yourself, what exactly was the self made of in the first place? Think about the last week of your life. How many of your decisions were driven by something you wanted? The job you have, the apartment you live in, the relationship you're in or not in, the food in your kitchen, the shows you watch, the way you spent last Saturday afternoon. All of it, at some point, began with a want. Now think about the world those wants built. Every advertisement ever created assumes desire as infrastructure. Every economy in human history is built on the premise that people want things and will work to get them. Every social system, education, career, dating, parenthood, is a structured response to the fact that humans are creatures of appetite. We are so thoroughly defined by our wanting that we've built entire civilizations around managing it. And we've spent most of recorded history arguing about whether desire is something to be celebrated, controlled, redirected, or eliminated. But never, until very recently, about whether it constitutes the self itself. In 2023, a philosopher named Agnes Callard wrote something that stopped a lot of people cold. She argued that desire isn't just something we have, it's something we are. That the self, the thing you call I, is at its core nothing but a bundle of wants arranged into a pattern we recognize as a person. Think about how you would describe yourself to someone who didn't know you. Not your name, not your job, but you. You would almost certainly reach for things you care about, things you want, things you're drawn toward, and things you're not. The self, in practice, is a set of orientations, a constellation of leanings. Remove the leanings, and what's left isn't a purer, freer version of you. What's left is the question: was there ever anything underneath? Remove the wanting, and you don't have a liberated self. You have a gap where a self used to be. This is why the GLP-1 patients felt unsettled. They hadn't lost pleasure in things they were doing. They had lost the pull toward things they hadn't done yet. And without that pull, that constant low-level gravitational force toward the next thing, the shape of who they were became harder to locate. Go back to that quiet morning for a second. You're lying in bed, the room is still, and you want nothing. The feeling isn't peace. It's closer to the sensation of trying to find your reflection in a mirror and not being sure something is looking back. So here's what that actually means. If desire is what the self is made of, can you ever really choose your desires? Or were they always something that happened to you? Now, you might be thinking something right now, and I want to address it directly. You might be thinking, okay, but I've had mornings like that. Mornings where I just didn't feel like doing anything. And I wasn't having an identity crisis. I was tired. This just sounds like burnout or depression, dressed up in philosophy. And that rhyme is real. Depression often includes a flattening of desire, the inability to feel pleasure or motivation, one of the most debilitating symptoms we know of. But here's the distinction that changes everything. What these patients describe is not the absence of good feeling, it's the absence of the pull. They still experience pleasure in the moment. A good meal still tastes good. A warm conversation still feels warm. What's gone is the anticipation, the hunger, the forward-leaning quality of the self. Which means desire and pleasure are two different systems. You can have pleasure without desire. You can want something intensely and feel nothing when you get it. Anyone who has worked very hard toward a goal and felt strangely empty after achieving it has touched this. The pleasure is present. The desire that organized the previous months is suddenly gone. And the gap it leaves feels wrong in a way that's hard to name. And what this tells us is that we've been asking the wrong question about desire all along. We've been asking, is desire the source of happiness? But that's not it. Desire is the source of direction. And when direction disappears, even if nothing else changes, the self loses its orientation, not its happiness, its sense of being someone going somewhere. And here's what the GLP-1 patients discovered. Something the researchers weren't looking for. Something the philosophers hadn't anticipated. The question we've been asking, what would you do without desire, is the wrong question. Because the people who lost their sense of wanting didn't suddenly become different people with different values who make different decisions. They didn't become Zen masters or empty shells. What happened was more specific and more unsettling than that. They lost the sense that there is someone making the decisions. One patient described it precisely. I still do things. I still make choices, but it feels more like watching myself do things than being the one who does them. Like the I that used to want to do things is gone, and what's left is just behavior. This is the discovery. Desire is not just something you feel. Desire is not just motivation or hunger or appetite. Desire is the substance of the self. The thing you call I is not a stable, permanent entity that happens to have desires. It is a pattern of desires, a shape made of wanting. Remove the wanting. The shape dissolves. You don't find yourself beneath your desires, the way you'd find a room after clearing out the furniture. The desires are the room. They are you. And this means something that lands very quietly, but changes everything. You cannot want to stop wanting. The wanting is already there, before you are. You showed up inside it. Now, if that's true, humans have been living with this problem for thousands of years, and some of them built entire systems of thought trying to answer it. What did they find? Now, here's what's remarkable. Humans have known this problem for a very long time, even before they had the science to see it clearly. Every major philosophical and spiritual tradition in history has tried to answer the question of what to do with desire. And now, seen through the lens of what we've just discovered, those answers look completely different. The first camp, represented by Buddhism and Stoicism, said, desire is the source of suffering. Reduce it. The Buddha's second noble truth is literally that craving is the origin of pain. Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher who was born a slave and became one of Rome's most influential thinkers, built his entire system around a single practice: learning to want only what is within your control. Not to suppress desire, but to redirect it toward things that cannot be taken from you. And for centuries, this seemed like an answer about happiness. But it wasn't. It was an answer about the self. Those traditions weren't trying to make you more content. They were trying to teach you how to be less owned by a self that you didn't choose. How to loosen the grip of desires that arrived before you had any say in the matter, and to find, beneath the noise, something quieter, something you might actually recognize as yours. There was a monk in 7th century Japan named Saicho, who spent 12 years in isolation on Mount Hiei without descending once. His students would carry food up the mountain. He would sit and read and practice, not eliminating wanting. That's not what the tradition asked, but learning which of his desires were noise and which were signal, which were things the world had planted in him, and which were things that, when he followed them, made him feel most genuinely himself. 12 years to learn the difference. The second camp, Nietzsche, and later the existentialists, went the other direction entirely. For Nietzsche, desire was not a problem to be managed. It was the essence of what it means to be alive. The will to power isn't about domination over others. It's about the fundamental impulse of any living thing to extend itself, to create, to overcome, to become more than it was. To want is to be alive. And not just alive in the biological sense. Alive in the sense of being oriented toward something beyond what you already are. Nietzsche watched his contemporaries, comfortable, well-fed, culturally sophisticated, and saw something that disturbed him deeply. People who had everything they needed and wanted nothing in particular. People who had arranged their lives so thoroughly around safety and comfort that the drive toward anything, toward creation, toward difficulty, toward the unknown, had been carefully managed out of existence. He called them the last men, and he considered them the most troubling human possibility. Not because they were suffering, because they weren't. They simply were. Present tense only. No future tense attached. Both camps, separated by centuries and continents, are circling the same discovery. That desire is not something the self uses. It's what the self is made of. And the question has never been how to get rid of it. The question is whether any of it is truly yours. Go back to that quiet morning one more time. The room, the silence, nothing pulling you anywhere. The reason it feels wrong isn't because peace is wrong. It's because you're experiencing, for a moment, what it's like to exist outside of the only self you've ever known. But here's where you might push back. You might say, if the self is desire, and desire is neurochemistry, then nothing I do is really chosen. I'm just a pattern of chemical impulses calling itself a person. And that sounds less like a philosophical discovery and more like an excuse for not being responsible for anything. This is a real objection, and it deserves a real answer. The fact that desire has a biological substrate doesn't make it less real. Your thoughts also have a biological substrate. Neurons firing, synapses connecting, chemicals flowing. Does that make your love for someone not real because it involves oxytocin? The self being made of desire doesn't make the self less real. It makes desire more fundamental than we thought. And here's the thing about agency. Even the desire to have different desires is still desire. If you've ever tried to change what you want, tried to want healthier food, or want to exercise more, or want to be more patient with the people you love, you know how hard it is. Not because you're weak, because desire doesn't take orders from your intentions. You can decide to act differently. You cannot decide to want differently. You can only want it, or not. Which means agency isn't about escaping desire. It's about learning which desires, when you follow them, produce a life you actually recognize as yours. That's not the same as having no freedom. It might be a more honest version of what freedom actually is. So what does all of this mean for that quiet morning? The room, the coffee getting cold, the phone you haven't reached for. What we've found, following this thread, is that the silence you're feeling isn't freedom. It isn't peace. It is the closest thing to the absence of you that you could experience while still being conscious. The philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer, writing in the 19th century, said, "Man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills." You can act on your desires. You can satisfy them, resist them, redirect them, but you cannot choose which desires arise. They arrive. And in arriving, they make you. They are not your possession. You are theirs. And maybe maybe that's not a trap. Maybe it's the only honest answer to the question, who are you? You are the shape of what you want, not what you have, not what you've done. What you are, right now, is the direction you're leaning. The thing you'll reach for when no one's watching. The hunger you carry when you're not thinking about it. So go back to that morning, the silence, the absence of pull, and notice something. You're still here, wondering about it, still curious, still leaning toward the question. That leaning? That is you. It always was.